Today, we're going to dive into a topic that has just completely changed over the last decade: alimony here in Massachusetts. You know, what used to be a pretty straightforward formula has turned into one of the most complex and, frankly, uncertain parts of family law. So, what on earth happened? Let's break it all down.
Not that long ago, figuring out alimony was kind of like following a recipe. You had clear ingredients, you had clear steps, and you got a predictable result. Well, as you can see here, that simple formula, it's gone. Today, it is a tangled web of different factors, and the outcome is anything but certain. We're going to unravel how we got from point A to point B, step by step. So our story really starts back in 2011, in what you could call the era of clarity. And this was all thanks to one big piece of legislation, the Alimony Reform Act.
The whole point of the Alimony Reform Act, we'll just call it the ARA, was to take all the guesswork out of the equation. It created this structured, predictable framework so that everybody, the spouses, the lawyers, the judges, all knew the rules of the game. The key word here was consistency. Just look at this chart. It shows you exactly how clear the ARA made things. It set up these really bright line rules for how long alimony could last. So, for example, if you were married for 12 years, boom, you fall into that 10 to 15-year bracket. You do a quick calculation, 70% of 12 years, and that tells you the maximum alimony term is 8.4 years. It was simple, predictable math that gave everyone a clear timeline.
And it wasn't just about how long it would last. The ARA also set a presumptive cap on the amount of alimony. Generally, it was set somewhere between 30 to 35% of the difference between what the two parties earned. This percentage, right here, became the core of the alimony formula that literally everyone used for years.
But here's the absolute key. That entire system, all that predictable math, it was resting on a single financial pillar: the assumption that alimony payments were tax-deductible for the person paying them. Everybody just took it for granted. And well, that pillar was about to get completely knocked down.
So, let's get to our first major disruption. Back in 2017, the federal government passed the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, or TCJA. And while it changed a lot of things, its impact on alimony was, well, massive and permanent.
So here's the timeline of how it all went down. The federal law passed in 17, but the really important date was December 31st, 2018. For any divorce agreement made after that day, the federal tax deduction for alimony just vanished. Gone. By 2022, Massachusetts did the same thing at the state level. In the blink of an eye, a cornerstone of divorce finance was just gone.
So why did this break the math? Well, think about it like this. That 30 to 35% formula was built assuming the person paying alimony would get a tax break, which would lower their actual out-of-pocket cost. Without that deduction, the true financial burden on the payer just skyrocketed. So applying the old formula suddenly became totally unfair. The courts had no choice but to ditch it. And just like that, the era of clarity was over.
Okay, so the tax law has changed. The old formula is useless, so the Massachusetts courts had to step in and try to figure out a new way forward. And this led to a whole series of landmark decisions that added brand new layers of complexity to alimony cases.
This quote comes from the biggest of those cases, Cavanagh v. Cavanagh. See, before this decision, the way it was usually done was to calculate child support first. And a lot of times, that calculation would eat up so much of the payer's income that there'd be very little left to even consider for alimony. In Cavanagh, the state's highest court said, nope, that approach is an abuse of discretion.
Instead, the court created this mandatory three-step framework you're looking at right here. Now, in every single case that involves both alimony and child support, judges have to run the numbers twice. First, they calculate alimony first, then child support. Second, they do it the other way around: child support first, then alimony. And finally, they have to compare the after-tax results of both scenarios and pick the one they think is the most equitable for the family. It turned a simple calculation into a complex financial bake-off.
The Cavanagh decision, though, it raised a huge question. A central part of any alimony calculation is what the recipient actually needs for support. But just as everyone was wrapping their heads around this new Cavanagh framework, another court decision came along and totally changed the definition of need itself.
And that brings us to a 2024 case, Openshaw v. Openshaw. For a long time, need was about covering expenses to maintain the marital lifestyle. You know, the house, the cars, the vacations. But Openshaw said that if a couple had a regular, established habit of saving money during the marriage, then the recipient's ability to keep saving money after the divorce could be considered part of their need. This was a massive expansion of that definition.
Okay, so let's put all the pieces together and look at the new reality. You've got the loss of tax deductions, you've got these really complex court-mandated calculations. All of it has created a fundamentally new and way more complicated alimony landscape here in Massachusetts.
So today, a judge has to balance all of these competing factors. They have to think about the real cost of alimony without any tax deduction. They have to perform that dual Cavanagh calculation. They have to look at a much broader definition of income and an expanded definition of need that can now even include savings. The simple recipe is gone, replaced by this very delicate and complex balancing act.
This slide really maps out the entire journey. We started over on the left with that simple ARA formula. Then came the disruptions. First the tax law change, then the court decisions that forced this complex two-track analysis and blew up the definition of need, which brings us to the new reality over on the right.
So what's the bottom line in all of this? This chart gives you a pretty good idea. All of these changes together have created some serious upward pressure on total support payments. The key takeaway is that combined alimony and child support orders can now eat up 50% or even more of a pair's take-home pay, a level that was pretty much unheard of in the old formula-based system.
And this leaves us with a really critical final question. In a world without formulas, how is your financial future even determined? The answer? Well, it's not in a spreadsheet anymore. It's in the very specific facts of your case, the quality of your arguments, and a judge's discretion in this new, complicated landscape. Predictability is gone, and that makes expert navigation more essential than ever before.